Am I the a-hole for pretending to not know my grandparents? Just for background information, when I, 19 female, was 4 years old, my dad died. At his funeral, his parents told me, my mom, 28-year-old at the time, and my sister, 6-year-old at the time, that we are the reasons he died. They also kept his life insurance money that was supposed to go to my sister and I. Since then, my grandparents have refused contact with all three of us, and the only form of contact I have with them is them sending me and my sister a $50 gift card to Walmart twice a year, birthdays and Christmas. The last time I received a gift card from them was on my 10th birthday, and it was for Babies R Us. I haven't heard from them since. They live in Florida and I live in New York, so I have no chance of seeing them either. At least I thought. Flash forward to present day, 3 days ago now, I was in Walmart near my house to get a few things for my mom. When I walked past the pharmacy, I saw my dad's parents. I tried to hide in the aisles because I didn't want confrontation, but they saw me anyway. They started asking me a bunch of questions about my family's financial situations at college and if I'm married yet, stuff like that. I responded by saying, I have no idea who you are. They looked angry and shocked by this, but told me who they were, and after that, I told them I had no desire to talk to them and didn't have anything to say to them anyway. I started walking away and was just going to leave it alone, but then they said, "You're so disrespectful. We are your grandparents, and you need to treat us better than that. Your mom did a terrible job with you." After that comment, I turned around and went off on them. I said something along the lines of, "You are not my grandparents because you abandoned my sister and I after telling us we are the reasons for our dad's death, and you stole his money from us. Don't you dare talk about my mother either, because she did an amazing job with us without any help from you too. I'd be happy with never seeing your sorry faces again." I started to walk away again and heard my grandmother start to cry, but I kept walking. Am I the a-hole? They're technically my grandparents, but they did so many things that are unforgivable. Edit. Also, my dad was active in the military when he passed. The VA has been paying my sister and I a certain amount every month since his passing. I did not have access to this money until a year ago when I turned 18. To me, it doesn't seem like a coincidence that they showed up only a little while after I gained access to that money. Now for the top comments. Not the a-hole. They are essentially strangers to you, of their own volition. You reap what you sow. I couldn't have said it better myself. Not the a-hole. Indeed, I really admire Opie for knowing exactly what to say in that moment. I think fate put them together so Opie could set the record straight. Not the a-hole for sure. Not the a-hole, and for my money, I'd say they were quizzing you about your education and finances and marital status, because they are either in or about to be in dire straits money-wise. If they wanted to know all of that, they should have stayed in touch and not treated you so horribly. They live in Florida, but go to a Walmart in New York for their prescriptions? Right. I'd bet $1 they were going to try to hit you and your family up for money or lodging or something. That's what I was thinking. The only reason they'd have to come up to New York is for my aunt, Dad's sister. But even then, she lives an hour or so from me, and the Walmart where I saw them was 5 minutes down the road from my house. So why were they there, you know? Not the a-hole. If anything, you were nicer than they deserved. If they were so interested, where the hell were they for the last 15 years? Not the a-hole. What do they expect after literally stealing your inheritance completely and not contacting you with at least a phone call for literally years? Next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for leaving a family gathering and insisting mother-in-law apologize over M&Ms? My wife, 34 female, and I, 31 female, have 2 wonderful children, 4 male and 4 female twins. They were conceived with my wife's eggs, a known sperm donor, and I carried/birthed them. Both kids ended up being practical clones of my wife, so it's pretty clear to everyone who contributed the genetic material. My in-laws had everyone together at their house earlier this month. We're all vaccinated, and the weather was nice, so we had a barbecue. My kids were outside playing with their cousins, and sister-in-law, mother-in-law, and I were chatting in the kitchen. At one point, my twins run inside from playing and ask if they can have some M&Ms that they see on the counter. I tell them, no, we'll be eating in 15 minutes, you can have them after dinner. They run back out and mother-in-law excuses herself to go outside. A little bit later, sister-in-law and I get the call that food is ready. So we go outside, and I see my kids each have a little cup full of M&Ms that they are eating. I tell my kids that they knew they were not supposed to be eating those and took away the cups. Mother-in-law comes over and says that she gave them the M&Ms and they can have them. To which I replied, no, they can't. It's dinner time. You were there when I told them no. Mother-in-law says again that they can have some chocolate, it's fine, and tries to take the cups out of my hands. We go back and forth with no, yes, no for a minute, prompting wife to start walking over to us, just in time to hear mother-in-law say, in front of my kids, I'm saying it's okay. They aren't even your kids. They're wife's. Just give them the chocolate. Wife had mother-in-law repeat herself and said something like, absolutely not. We're leaving. I put the M&Ms on the nearest table, grabbed both my kids, who were now softly crying, and started to pack our stuff. The whole event erupted into chaos. Father-in-law screaming about the disrespect of us leaving, grandmother crying, brother-in-law and sister-in-law arguing with father-in-law, mother-in-law crying that her only daughter was abandoning her. It was a mess. After a couple hours at home, the kids seemed okay, but mother-in-law saying I'm not their mom really scared them. Wife spent about 4 hours on rotating phone calls with all of her family, from father-in-law screaming at her, mother-in-law crying over how it took her grandkids away over M&Ms, and made her out to be a bad grandma, brother-in-law trying to get into drama, grandmother depressed saying she would die without seeing her great-grandkids again. Wife's message to all of them was that mother-in-law needed to apologize to me and to our children for what she said. We made it clear that we would have no problem spending time with grandmother and brother-in-law's family, but we would not bring the kids around mother-in-law until she apologized. As you can guess, the apology has not happened, but the phone calls of guilt trips, yelling, and crying have not let up. I feel an apology is not even a big deal, and at this point, mother-in-law is making the choice not to see her grandkids. I want to hold firm, but I know how hard this all is on my wife, even if I really don't think it's my fault. Am I the a-hole for insisting on an apology? Not the a-hole. This was said specifically to inflict pain, to diminish your family. Even after an apology, not sure with that behavior I'd see her again. You birthed those kids. She knew exactly what it meant when she said it. Right? Over M&Ms, for Pete's sake. And it's not even about M&Ms. It's how she clearly doesn't respect/recognize Opie as a parent to her own children and will likely undermine her parental authority in the future. Not the a-hole. The argument wasn't over M&Ms. It was about mother-in-law disrespecting you as a parent. First by undermining you, and then by openly stating that she doesn't even consider you your children's parent, despite the fact that you grew them, birthed them, and are raising them. She implied that in her eyes, the only family that counts is genetics, not the people who are there for you every day, support you, protect you, and love you unconditionally. Her attitude is disgusting, and I'm so sorry she confused and frightened your children like that. She was 100% the a-hole. Just a cool little bit of info. The woman who carries the babies from donated eggs does have an effect on the baby's DNA. It has been found that the RNA of the birth mother interacts with the baby's DNA, turning on or off bits of the DNA. Not the a-hole. But please keep in mind that mother-in-law revealed how she really feels. She genuinely believes her parental rights supersede yours. And if you get some superficial apology, that's still a pretty lonely and scary place for you to be. You should definitely expect more than an apology. You need real contrition. Now for the next story. Am I the a-hole for telling my parents not to raise their new child like they raised me? Before I was born, my parents had my older brother who sadly passed away of SIDS. Off the bat, they were trying to have another baby boy, and had my 2 older sisters before they had me. As the only boy, I was basically made a prince, and my sisters were pushed aside. Everything was about what I wanted. There was nothing I did that was ever wrong in their eyes, and anything to make me happy. Safe to say, I was a spoiled, entitled little brat that my sisters resented. That entitlement lasted until adulthood decided to hit me with a brutal reality that the world did not in fact revolve around me. A couple failed relationships later, I had to accept I was the problem and have tried to turn things around. I've been in therapy for a couple years to work out my problems and not be a total prick. My parents, by some miracle, decided to have a baby in their 50s. We're all shocked, but it's their lives, you know? Our little brother is a few months old, and finally we all got together to see him for the first time now that we're vaccinated. Later on in the day, I told my dad that I just hoped they'd do it different this time around. They asked me what I meant, and I pointed out like it was obvious. The way they treated me compared to how they did my sisters. Obviously, my problems are my own fault, and I take responsibility for my past actions. But the way I was raised is where a lot of those issues developed once I reached adulthood, and that negatively impacted my relationships. I'm 25 years old and only barely know mending my relationship with my sisters after years of dysfunction. My sisters chimed into the conversation too, and agreed they kinda messed up. All that was suggested was not to spoil our brother so much. Don't give in to every tantrum and actually discipline him. Our parents got pretty defensive quick, and we dropped the conversation. My dad has told me I had no right to critique their parenting or make any suggestions that they do things any different when they never did anything wrong. This has really upset them, and they're pretty mad that we ganged up on them. Technically, I started it, so that's why I wanted to ask if maybe I took it too far bringing this up and if I'm the a-hole. Now for the top comments. Not the a-hole. Tell your dad that as a victim of their parenting, you have every right to critique it. That you are the one who decides if they did anything wrong, not them. Especially since they say they didn't do anything wrong, even if OP's proof. They very much did a lot wrong. Dad, we did nothing wrong. OP, hello Dad, I'm nothing. From what you are telling us, not a hole. Because you criticized your parents out of concern for your little brother, not for retaliation or something. That your sisters are agreeing should let them see in theory that they are not as perfect as they think. Oh, and about the did nothing wrong part, you can also be wrong by doing nothing. You don't need to do something for that. Letting a child having their way and doing nothing, for example. So they may not have done anything, but the lack of parenting is there. You make a good point about the doing nothing. I agree with you there. Not a hole if you're an adult, and your adult sisters also agree that your parents could have done a better job. The only acceptable response would be for them to take your critiques and learn from them. If your sisters agreed almost immediately after you brought it up, it means they've agreed this whole time, and each didn't want to be the first to say it. So don't feel bad that you sparked a necessary dialogue. And this is about the well-being and humanity of a newborn child, so you have every right to not want your baby brother to have the same problems you did, and every right to voice concerns based on your lived experiences. I hope that your parents do better this time around. Add it, I'm also glad that you've made up with your sisters, because coming from an only girl, it can be absolutely infuriating when my parents treat my brothers like kings and me like a maid. Good on you for being better. I sure hope so. Obviously, not every single problem we develop later on in life is our parents' fault, but taking all this time to think back to our childhoods, there really was a lot of dysfunction, and I'd rather not end up with the same issues I've tried to overcome. Last story is titled, Am I the a-hole for exposing my parents' lies and damaging their reputation? I, 21 male, have a strained relationship with my parents. They are involved in pretty much every social event / circle in our city, be it church, school, clubs, etc. For them, what other people think is the most important thing. For that, they will lie about pretty much any bad thing that could potentially tarnish their standing, and have forced my sister, 24 female, and I to behave in certain ways or follow specific rules. Some examples. My sister and I were not allowed to play with certain kids in our school or neighborhood because their parents were in trade rather than academics. My parents forced me to stop talking to a really close friend in middle school because his parents got divorced. When I got caught smoking in high school, my parents made up a distant uncle with substance problems and told everyone he influenced me. My sister came home one day introducing her Spanish boyfriend to my parents. They didn't like that, so they told everyone the boyfriend is an exchange student that we are housing. My mother once made up a bunch of stuff about a neighboring couple. Stuff like her husband is cheating, she does it out contents to pay the bills. Of course, she always claims to have heard it from someone else, who heard it from someone else, etc. I could list plenty more, but there's text limit. Now recently, I was near my hometown visiting a friend, and I ran into the leader of a church group I was part of. I was pretty engaged in that group, so we sat down for a coffee and talked about the good old times. He asked me about my studies and how my fiancé is doing. I was confused and told him I'm not studying and don't have a fiancé. Turns out my parents made up a bunch of lies to cover the fact that I decided to go for an apprenticeship and turned out to be gay. One thing led to another, and together we went over a lot of incidences and stories from the past, with me exposing more and more lies. The results could be seen a few days later. My parents called me very angrily, asked me how could I do this to them. You ruined our lives. We can never talk to the neighbors again. I told them their entire reputation is built on lies and spreading rumors, that it is disgusting they even call themselves Christians at this point, and that I'm done being part of their little scheme. My sister later called me after Mom called her in tears. She's torn. On one side, she gets me, as she already gone minimal contact with my parents. On the other hand, it solved nothing but hurt my parents. Sounds like you didn't even know that you were exposing them until it was too late. Someone asks a question about your life, and you answered. It's your fault your parents didn't tell you what to say. Joke. Not today, Ho. Don't know if it changes your voting, but I was very much aware that the group leader would spill the beans. This is a small town, and gossip is his lifeblood. I knew he would not keep it to himself and that it would spread. Still doesn't mean your parents should lie to save their reputation. Your parents dug this hole for themselves. Now they're just being outed as racists, homophobes, and they don't like it. If you have to lie to have a good reputation, you don't have one. They deserve it. Not only that, but imagine the lives they, the parents, have already ruined. I'd be grateful to finally be vindicated over their BS. Not today, Hull. Consequences of their own actions, really. That's the best way to put it. You reap the seeds you sow.